It happened in the dark. No invasion, no tanks rolling through Caracas, just a door kicked in, a president taken from his bed, and a plane heading north. And suddenly, the President of the United States was saying something extraordinary. "We're in charge," Donald Trump told reporters. "We're in charge. Not of a war zone, not of a protectorate, but of a sovereign nation 1,000 miles away." This was not Iraq. And that is precisely what makes it more dangerous. Because this time, the ambition is quieter. No democracy building, no reconstruction plans, just pressure, coercion, control. A single idea drives this moment. That power can be exercised without responsibility. That a country can be bent without being governed. If you want to understand where American power is heading and what it risks becoming, stay with me. This story is not really about Venezuela. It's about a temptation that returns again and again in history. And to see how we got here, we need to slow down and look at the problem Trump believes he is solving. At the center of this moment is a deceptively simple question. What does the United States actually want from Venezuela? The answer, according to this administration, is not ideological conversion. It is compliance. Washington does not need Caracas to become democratic tomorrow. It needs it to become useful. Useful in stopping drug flows, useful in blocking Iranian and Cuban influence, useful in redirecting oil revenues away from America's adversaries, and above all, useful in demonstrating that resistance to American power has consequences. This is why the White House is not dismantling the Venezuelan state. It is trying to seize its steering wheel. The bet is that removing Nicolás Maduro was the hard part. That the remaining system, military leaders, ministers, oil executives, can be bent rather than broken. But here lies the tension. A state built on loyalty, fear, and ideology does not pivot easily. And coercion, when mistaken for control, has a long record of backfiring. To understand why this gamble feels familiar and why it keeps tempting American presidents, we need to go back to how the United States learned to use power in its own backyard. To grasp this moment, you have to see it as part of a long American pattern, not an aberration. For more than 2 centuries, Washington has viewed the Western Hemisphere as a zone of influence, not merely a neighborhood. When instability appears close to home, the instinct is rarely patience. It is intervention, direct or indirect. Sometimes that intervention wears the language of ideals. Sometimes it is brutally transactional. Venezuela sits at the crossroads of this history. A country rich in oil, poorly governed, politically polarized, and deeply entangled with foreign rivals. Over time, sanctions replaced diplomacy. Pressure replaced persuasion. And the goal subtly shifted from changing behavior to removing the problem itself. What makes this episode different is not the use of force. It is the belief that force can be surgical, final, and clean, that decapitating the leadership would avoid the messiness of rebuilding. That power, once demonstrated, would simply be obeyed. History, however, rarely rewards that assumption. It punishes it, and the first signs of that punishment appeared almost immediately in a crisis that was supposed to prove this strategy was working. The first shock was meant to project strength. Instead, it exposed fragility. The raid that removed Maduro was flawless in execution. Fast, precise, kinematic. A triumph in tactical terms. But strategy does not end when the target is captured. That is where it begins. Within hours, Washington faced a dilemma it had tried to avoid. Who actually governs Venezuela now? The answer was Delcy Rodriguez, a familiar face, a regime insider, a survivor. To American planners, she looked like stability. Someone who could keep the machinery running, someone who could take calls, someone who could make deals. But legitimacy does not transfer with handcuffs. And fear is not the same as authority. As Trump publicly claimed control, Rodriguez had to perform a delicate dance, condemning Maduro's removal at home while signaling cooperation abroad. If you're watching this unfold, it's worth pausing here, because moments like this are when power either consolidates or unravels. And history shows that early success often masks deeper trouble. What comes next is not about personalities. It's about a system beneath the surface, one that rarely bends the way outsiders expect. Beneath the headlines, the real battle is invisible. States are not controlled by presidents alone. They are controlled by incentives, loyalties, and fear. Venezuela's system was built to resist pressure, not absorb it. Power is fragmented among generals, intelligence chiefs, party bosses, and economic gatekeepers. Each survives by balancing the others. This is the mechanism Washington is now trying to hijack. The White House is betting that sanctions, oil embargoes, and the implicit threat of force can realign those incentives, that officials will choose survival over ideology. That cooperation with the United States will seem safer than defiance. But coercion has limits. When everyone fears betrayal, no one trusts agreements. When authority comes from abroad, it weakens at home. Delcy Rodriguez may appear to sit at the center. In reality, she stands on shifting ground. Every concession she makes outwardly erodes her protection inwardly. This is the paradox of indirect rule. The more Washington demands obedience, the more unstable its chosen partner becomes. And when that instability surfaces, it does so suddenly through a second crisis, sharper and far more dangerous than the first. The second crisis is not dramatic. There are no helicopters, no doors kicked in. That is what makes it more dangerous. It unfolds quietly, inside institutions that no foreign power truly controls. Whispers in military barracks, hesitation in ministries, delays in oil terminals. Signals begin to blur. Some officials comply halfway, others hedge, others wait to see who survives. This is where Washington's leverage meets its ceiling. An offshore naval presence can intimidate. Sanctions can punish, but neither can manufacture loyalty. As pressure intensifies, the risks multiply. Push too hard, and the system fractures. Pull back, and authority evaporates. This is the moment when threats lose credibility, when escalation becomes the only way to preserve influence, and when a limited operation starts to demand unlimited commitment. The United States has been here before, confident that restraint would suffice, surprised when restraint failed. What looks like control from Washington can feel like chaos in Caracas. And chaos has consequences not just for elites, but for ordinary people caught in between. To see those consequences clearly, you have to stop thinking like a strategist and start thinking like a citizen. If you are a Venezuelan watching this, power does not look abstract. It looks personal. It looks like uncertainty at the grocery store, silence from your employer, rumors spreading faster than facts. When governments wobble, daily life contracts, people stop planning. They start bracing. You hear promises from abroad about stability and order, but what you feel is hesitation. Officials afraid to decide, institutions afraid to move, and you are caught in the middle. This is the cruel irony of coercive power. It is meant to discipline elites, but it lands hardest on citizens. For years, Venezuelans were told democracy was coming. Now, they are told realism must come first, that elections can wait. That order matters more than voice. If you feel disoriented, that reaction is rational. History shows that when great powers prioritize control over consent, ordinary people pay the price. If you care about what happens when foreign policy becomes a gamble played with other people's lives, share this conversation. These stories only matter if they are heard, and beyond Venezuela, the shockwaves are already spreading outward. What happens in Caracas never stays in Caracas. Across Latin America, governments are watching closely not for Venezuela's future, but for their own. the message they hear is unsettling. Power, once again, is being exercised unilaterally. Sovereignty appears conditional. Alignment is rewarded. Distance is punished. For allies, this creates anxiety. For rivals, opportunity. Russia and China do not need to intervene loudly. They only need to wait. Every hint of American overreach reinforces their narrative that US power is unpredictable, transactional, and self-interested. Meanwhile, regional stability grows more fragile. Colombia, Mexico, the Caribbean, each now wonders how far this logic extends. This is how spheres of influence harden, not through treaties, but through precedent. And precedents travel fast. The United States may believe it is restoring order. Others see a return to hierarchy, a hemisphere shaped less by partnership than by pressure. History teaches a sobering lesson here. When power is used to dominate rather than persuade, it accumulates resistance even among those who quietly comply. And that resistance defines the future. Which brings us to the most difficult question of all. What comes next if this strategy succeeds, stalls, or collapses? There are three futures embedded in this moment, and none are clean. The first is success. Rodriguez cooperates. The system holds. Oil flows resume under new terms. The United States claims a quiet victory control without occupation. But even here, the cost is subtle. Democracy is postponed, authoritarian habits are preserved, and America teaches the world that power matters more than legitimacy. The second future is drift. Compliance is partial. Orders are negotiated, delayed, diluted. Washington escalates rhetorically, but hesitates materially. Venezuela becomes a gray zone, neither stable nor transformed. A permanent problem managed, not solved. The third future is collapse. The internal balance breaks. Factions turn inward. The United States faces a choice it wanted to avoid. Withdraw and lose credibility, or deepen involvement and own the consequences. Great powers often believe they can choose outcomes. History suggests they usually choose only between costs. Which of these paths unfolds will not be decided by statements in Washington. It will be shaped by realities on the ground and by how far the United States is willing to go to sustain an illusion of control. That brings us to the deeper insight behind this entire episode. This moment will not be remembered for the raid itself. It will be remembered for what it revealed. That American power, at its most confident, still struggles with restraint, that the temptation to dominate is strongest when the cost seems low. And that control, when mistaken for governance, becomes a liability. Trump wants Venezuela's oil, its obedience, and its alignment. What he may inherit instead is responsibility without consent. By sidelining Venezuela's democratic movement, the United States risks becoming what it long opposed, an external guarantor of repression justified by realism. History is unforgiving on this point. Shortcuts to stability rarely stay short. And power exercised without legitimacy demands constant reinforcement. If you take one lesson from this, let it be this. The greatest danger to a superpower is not resistance. It is overconfidence. If this analysis helped you see the world more clearly, stay with me. Share this conversation, because the next chapter will not be written in Caracas alone, but in how America chooses to wield its power from here on.